What's up, everyone? Well, it's early spring here at Bonsaify headquarters, and today I am going to repot these young Japanese maples, Acer palmatum. Talk a little bit about how to get the Nebari going in the right direction. Maybe about a month ago, listed Japanese maples on the site for sale, and when I was younger, I had the impression from going to nurseries and whatnot that you couldn't grow Japanese maples from seed basically because the seedlings are not strong enough on their own roots or, a variety of other things. But in reality, if you just go pick good seed from a healthy looking tree, you're not going to get the exact tree that you pick it from. And the crazier the tree, in other words, like if it has dissectum type leaves, very crazy color or something like that, you're not going to get the exact replica of that tree in the seedlings that you grow. But interestingly, in my experience, you will get a good variety of different things that can actually be useful and even more interesting than the parent tree that you got it from. So don't feel like you need to use grafted or named cultivars only. All of these are seedlings, and to be honest with you, I can't remember where the seed came from off the top of my head. So what I've done is take this out of the container and trim off any long and circling roots and then trim it back basically to sort of a cone shape here. So it's sloping down evenly in all directions, and I've cut off long roots. So I've got sort of a small cone of roots that I'm going to use. I started with the smallest one, and I've got sort of a medium-sized one here based on the batch that I have. These are 2 years old. They were grown from seed, then at 1 year old transplanted, wired, and put into these 3-inch containers. So I've pulled this out, and I am cutting off the bottom sort of quarter of the roots. It's in our perlite mixture, and then I'm taking a chopstick here and just sort of gently teasing away soil from starting at the base and working outwards. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to catch roots like this. These circling roots are the ones that I want to either remove entirely or cut short and unwind. So as I come along here, I come to a root that's kind of snagging my chopstick, and then I'll stop and cut that root off, or in some other way remove the circling aspect of it, so that we're creating a radial set of roots. And as the tree continues to grow, those roots will get bigger and start to form the Nebari that we actually want to see in a bonsai Japanese maple. So this is a great example of one of the things that you want to do at this stage. So you can see that there are a lot of roots down here at this level, but then there's these roots that are up slightly higher. And those roots are going to be problematic in terms of forming a good Nebari. So I need to cut those off. We're going to concentrate on getting the roots all to be in one area, radially coming out from the trunk, but all at the same height. All right, and now with that kind of combed out, what I have is a root ball that has still some 2 to 3 inch long roots and sort of a cone shape. But I'm going to go a little bit further because this is a very young tree. I want to make sure that there are no roots causing problems in here. So coming out of the flat of seedlings, this one looks like it didn't have great roots, but I'm still trying to normalize everything here and kind of get in here either with the tip of a chopstick to comb out some of this cocoa core or the tip of the scissors. So as I go further into this, what I'm seeing is that this large root right here is not going to be super great in terms of the Nebari. A lot of times what happens is that one large root starts to take off and then you get sort of lopsided Nebari straight from the beginning. So if you're starting from young plants like this, you can even things out so that you never, or there's less of a chance of you actually creating sort of imbalanced Nebari. So pulling off that large root, I still have plenty of roots, and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the smaller one, which is to trim these a little bit further into kind of a cone shape. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm trimming all of the fine roots, making sure that they're radial, and then trimming them into the shape that I actually want the Nebari to be. And you might think, well, why would that help? But essentially, if all the roots are conforming to the shape that we want to create, that we eventually want the Nebari to take, then as each root gets bigger and they start to fuse together, they will have that shape still. And the only thing that we need to do at that point is manage any roots that die off or any roots that get overly vigorous. So for now, I think that that is sufficient, and I'm going to set this aside and pull out the third and largest of the three that I have here as examples. So I should mention that the timing of this, usually you wait for the buds to start opening like this so that there's a little bit of growth and there's evidence of the plant knowing that it's basically springtime. But you're still going to have to, if you live in a cold area, protect these after you've done the repotting, and also because of the new growth from any really deep freezing temperature swings. So as I would expect, the larger one has more roots circling here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the bottom quarter here, so just like I did with the other ones. But then I'm also going to come along and just kind of essentially shave off all of that mat of roots that's circling around the outside. If you've seen a bunch of videos on this channel, this root work will not look super different in some ways. So you can go further with Japanese maples in terms of trimming and in terms of arranging roots. But for now, with a 2-year-old like this, I think that just putting it into essentially a gallon can is going to be sufficient. Now, if I want to give myself more control, I can do what I did to some of the older maples that I did, and that is put something underneath the bottom here so that the roots on the bottom don't run straight down, and so that as these roots are coming down here, they're sort of hitting that flat surface and continuing outward rather than going down and back the other direction or something like that. So if you elect to just put it into a gallon can, you won't have that type of root control. Now, I've put these from about this stage, or maybe a year older than this, I've put them into Anderson flats to create that sort of flat, radially spreading roots. You'll notice that I took off some actually pretty good sized roots here, and I'm not too concerned about the scar at this point. We've got a long way to go with this tree, but I do want to make sure that I am reasonably comfortable with the radial nature of what is left here. All right, so that looks pretty good. And now, setting aside the younger ones, I have a tree that is a couple of years older, maybe 3 or 4, that I've been growing out in a gallon can for the last couple of years. And the process here is going to be pretty much the same. So let me just go through this tree, combing off the topsoil here. Then I'm going to trim any large roots and get down to that sort of same conical shape. So this is sort of an interesting problem here in that the root base is too wide this direction versus the opposite direction. I want to keep it reasonably radial, so I'm actually going to take off this large root to narrow it up, and because it's also the highest root that's left here on the tree. And then the next biggest root right behind it, I'm not going to take it off, but I am going to cut it back pretty hard to kind of weaken it compared to the rest of the roots in the composition, and just sort of make more fine division in the roots rather than allowing large roots to run. So I also did that on the bottom in a couple of places. I'm going to go a little bit further here because I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up for the correct kind of Nebari. And there are no large out of proportion roots here. So I mean, I could completely bare root this, but if it doesn't need to be bare rooted because the roots are generally behaving, then I wouldn't mind just sort of sticking it into the next size container and revisiting it in a year or two. Yeah, so this large root right here, I'm just going to cut back further. So whenever you make a large cut like that, just like when you make a large cut on the top of a maple tree, you should get a reasonably strong response in terms of new roots issuing in that location. All right, now for this session, I think that's going to be how I leave it in terms of trimming the roots. And because the tree is relatively large, I'm going to have to make sure that I anchor this nicely, and I'm probably going to put it straight into an Anderson flat with a root control disc underneath. And now returning to the first three smaller trees, I'm going to just go ahead and pot them up. And I could put them just back into 3-inch containers, or I could put them into regular gallons, but in this case I'm actually going to use these mesh-sided grow bags. The reason being that they have a lot of the benefits of pond baskets that are increasingly popular in bonsai circles, but they don't dry out quite as quickly. And because maples don't like to dry out, I think that this will be a better choice than a pond basket that has a tendency to dry out much more quickly. And what I'm doing right now is using a single hole punch to create tie point. All right, so I've punched four holes in each one so that I can actually stabilize the trees on the top using wire rather than trying to stabilize them just with the soil. All right, so I've used top guys to stabilize these guys in the containers because with the root work that we did, we need to tie them in some way. And I don't really want the wires down below the soil. So I'll keep an eye on these and make sure that I take them off before they do any scarring. You alternately can use some sort of rubber around the wire, but I find that it's just tedious to use it. Now, in terms of the growth of the trees, I'll probably leave them in these containers for about 2 years before I revisit them. And in that time, I'm largely going to just be leaving them to grow. I want the trunks to get bigger. But what I might do is cut back some of the secondary or smaller shoots that are long to create more budding down at the bottom and less shading from the top, so that we start to get a sacrifice branch as well as a bunch of fine branching. But I don't tend to grow maples quite the same way that I grow pines, because doing trunk chops leads to sort of scars that are not super exciting. So I have a tendency to try to establish the trunk line. So all of these are intended to be shohin size, or about 8 inches, and then establish sacrifice branches. So say in this case, this could be a sacrifice branch, and maybe this is the trunk line up to here. Eventually that'll be cut off and this will be cut off, and this will cause more swelling at the base while this causes some swelling here, and so we get the taper that we're looking for. It's a technique that I'm still playing with, and I don't have any great results to show as a result of it, but it is one of the techniques that is commonly used in Japan to grow maple trunks. That wraps up this video about working with young Japanese maples. If you want to pick up a couple of these, you can find them on bonsaify.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.